every single drawing I do uses some form of exaggeration. The vast majority of figurative art created by masters, regardless of whether it's classical drawing or painting, or contemporary comics and illustration, is using some form of exaggeration. I'll begin with the primary action line, but as I'm doing so, I'm intentionally trying to make it more extreme than what I see in the pose. I'll start with the line from the top of the ribcage down to the leg projecting backward on our right. But I'd like you to notice that I didn't simply try and capture the direction of the back leg. I've extended it out further, and it's going in a more extreme direction. It's as if the model were deepening her lunge even further. Remember, the tendency of the human brain is to stiffen the pose, so oftentimes when we feel like we're exaggerating, we're simply just capturing what's actually there. So now you'll see me tilt the ribcage back even more. Now I'll start to flesh out the torso a little more. It's important to remember that not every part of the figure needs to be exaggerated. You want to make decisions. For example, I'm drawing the width of the torso as well as the bowl for the pelvis pretty much as I see them. The torso is already going to seem exaggerated because I tilted the ribcage back. I don't need to also exaggerate the tilt of the pelvis. This isn't a hard and fast rule, it's just how I'm reacting to this particular pose. This is why it's critical to practice this kind of gesture drawing a lot, to familiarize yourself with the body, to experiment and to see what kinds of exaggerations will work. So after fleshing out the torso a bit, you'll now see me gesture the front leg. As you can see, I've drawn the leg projecting outward and forward more than I see in the pose itself. I've also extended the leg, making it longer than it appears in the reference photo. This wasn't intentional, I just got caught up in the flow of the drawing. But I like the way it looks, so I'm keeping it. Extending the length of the legs is actually incredibly common in both fashion design illustration as well as comic book drawing. Next, I'll head up toward the clavicles. I think the curvature of the clavicles is very beautiful, so I'm going to overemphasize the curvature of the clavicles as well as extend the gesture line well beyond the figure. Extending gesture lines is an interesting kind of exaggeration. It's a technique I use often to suggest movement, fluidity, and dynamism outside of the figure. Extended gesture lines operate almost like motion blurs. They can give the viewer a dramatic sense of time and movement. Even in my more realistic figure drawings, I tend to leave these kinds of extended gesture lines ghosted in the background. From here, you'll see me fleshing out the various parts of the body. As I'm doing so, if a part of the body is a little curved, I'll make it much more curved. You can see this best in the upper arm. The arm in the reference photo is a little straighter, but the arm in my drawing tends to curve much more. You can see me doing this in the back leg as well. In the reference photo, the back leg appears to project out a little more straight, but in my drawing, I've emphasized the S-curve. As I finish this drawing, it's important to note that I'm not demonstrating the one correct way to do this. I'm experimenting. I didn't start off with a plan for this gesture that I'm following through on, nor did I try and draw this pose before I demonstrated it. You're seeing me experiment in real time. Before we get you to your practice, there are a few other exaggerations I'd like to point out. First is that you can see that I've actually turned the ribcage slightly more toward the viewer. This helps emphasize the twist, which adds a little more drama and tension to the drawing. I've also exaggerated the appearance of the thoracic arch. You'll notice that it's much more visible in my drawing than it is in the reference photo. I've also tilted the head back a little more. These kinds of gesture drawings should not be thought of as precious drawings that need to be finished or resolved. These are experiments. Some of them will work and some of them won't, and that's perfectly fine. But the more of these kinds of exercises you do, the more comfortable you'll become with exaggeration. You'll be able to tell in advance what kinds of exaggerations will work in a drawing and which should be avoided. And there's no concrete list of which kinds of exaggerations will work and which won't. It's a very subjective process. Finally, you'll see me gesture the line of termination and separate the light from the shadows. Even the line of termination is slightly exaggerated. Now maybe you like this type of drawing and maybe you don't. The important thing is that I'm experimenting to figure out how I like to draw, and that's what you should be doing as well.
Check out my full course where you'll get a complete guide on how to draw the human figure, where we'll cover topics like gesture, volume and structure, shading, measuring, and proportion. That's at proko.com/Eviston.
I think it's equally important to look at drawings on their own without seeing the reference they were drawn from. This allows us to see what the language of drawing communicates all on its own. So in this trio, the drawing on the right is drawn from the same reference as the other two photos, but here I've used dynamic exaggeration to push the expressive aspects of the drawing. First, take a look at the leg on our right. I've extended this leg back much further than it actually appeared, and I've curved it much more. I've tried to exaggerate the curvature just enough to add drama and dynamism to the drawing without making the leg appear broken. How far you can push curvatures like this is somewhat subjective. That's why it's important for you to experiment to see what looks right to you. Now let's take a look at the arm that's coming in front of the torso. Once again, you can see that I've dramatized and exaggerated the curves. In particular, take a look at the forearm. The entire forearm has a bend to it that is not naturally found in real people. Real forearms curve somewhat, but I've exaggerated this curve for dramatic effect. Is it realistic? No. Is it dramatic? Yes. These kinds of quick experimental gesture drawings yield some of my very favorite drawings that I've ever done. These kinds of drawings have a vitality to them that you just don't find in more finished work. In fact, the unfinished quality of these drawings is what makes them so compelling to viewers. Leaving parts of a drawing unfinished invites the viewer to participate in the illusion. Most viewers really love the feeling of their minds having to assemble images of a figure from pigment smeared across a page. When we look at this quick study up close, we can see how rough some aspects of it really are. But we can also see numerous dramatic enhancements. For example, every curve in the outer contour I've curved just a little more than I observed in reality. I've increased the contrast between light and shadow, dramatizing the overall lighting effects. And nearly every line in this drawing was drawn quickly and passionately. This is important because most viewers can tell whether a line was drawn quickly or slowly. Viewers tend to prefer lines that were drawn quickly. They evoke a more emotional response. Now let's take a look at a more finished drawing in which I've used these techniques. Now this drawing took somewhere between 30 and 45 minutes. It's much more detailed than the previous drawing we just looked at. But hopefully you can see many of the same techniques being used. The arms are slightly elongated. The curvatures of the individual limbs as well as the contours have been enhanced. The light and shadow have been dramatized to make the musculature appear more dramatic. Many parts of the drawing are left unfinished, inviting the viewer to participate in the illusion, and wild gesture lines flow freely around the drawing. Now this is purely subjective, but ask yourself, would your drawings be improved by having more drama and more dynamism? If your answer is yes, then these kinds of experiments with dynamic exaggeration are an excellent way to achieve that. But I just wanted to give you a sense of some of the creative things you can do with gesture drawing. Experimenting with gesture drawing, using different materials, and drawing the figure in new ways are all excellent ways for you to have new experiences with the figure. The lessons you've learned in this course will hopefully allow you to push your figure drawings to new creative and expressive areas.
Exaggeration can dramatically improve your figure drawings by adding dynamism and action. But there is so much more to learn if you want to draw dynamic figures. In this collection of courses, you'll learn gesture drawing, the art of simplifying the figure into a dynamic pose that captures the action of the figure. You'll learn how to construct the figure from basic three-dimensional forms before learning how to add anatomy and complexity. And finally, you'll learn how to shade the figure with dramatic and accurate light and shadow. You can learn all of this in the full course over at proko.com/Eviston.